Welcome back to Relocating to Mexico, No Bull, episode number 7. Today, we're going to actually cover immigration predictions for 2023. I know it's the end of the year of 2022, but I think what I wanted to do in this episode is discuss our predictions for what direction immigration is going to go in based on the trends. I have here my partner in crime, Mexico Relocation Guide, Mariana. She's the owner of Mexico Relocation Guide, and I like to refer to her as the boots on the ground, like we would say in my profession. She deals with expats relocating to Mexico on a daily basis. She deals with facilitators and other individuals in Mexico that are working with expats, to include realtors and those types of things. So we're going to start off today's episode with our predictions for 2023 as far as immigration goes. I think there's going to be some changes in the immigration system, and it's constantly changing. It's been changing in 2022, and I think those changes are going to continue. So I think we're going to go over those changes and what it looks like for 2023. So let's start with residency, Mariana. I know that you've been dealing with a lot of facilitators, residency requirements. Now, I know they've been going up every year. What is your prediction for 2023 as far as the financial solvency requirements? And if you can discuss why they're actually going up, because I predict that they're going to be going up, and also kind of explain how it's calculated so that you can understand why these requirements are going up so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of, I think information that we're going to give you today that's just based solely on what we think is going to happen in 2023. This isn't anything that has been publicized yet, but we are making these assumptions because historically these things have happened year over year. So we can assume that 2023 will probably be no different. So we assume that in 2023, the income requirements will go up from currently the minimum you have to make monthly to be eligible for temporary residency is anywhere between $2,500 US dollars a month to about $2,600 US dollars a month. Different consulates ask for different requirements, but it's in that range, 2,500 to 2,600. However, in 2023, we think they're going to go up to 3,000 or 3,100 US dollars a month minimum to qualify for temporary residency. For permanent, that number is higher. So we're going to focus on temporary because it's going to be the minimum that you need to focus on to be eligible. The reason why we assume that they're going to go up is the formula that the consulates all over the world abroad use considers Mexico's minimum wage in their formula to come up with the monthly income requirements for economic solvency. There's other residency visa types, but we're going to focus on economic solvency because the majority of people watching this, either your show, Ernie, or my show, are probably people who are coming to Mexico under economic solvency. So Mexico uses a formula that considers Mexican minimum wage, and minimum wage in 2022 is 172 and 87 cents pesos. However, in 2023, the president of Mexico, AMLO, has already confirmed that the minimum wage is going to increase to 207 pesos. So that's a 20% difference. So considering that amount into the formula that the consulates use is how we come up with that 3,000 or 3,100 US dollars that's going to be required for temporary residency.
And I understand some of the consulates have already started requiring that. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, I know at least of Tucson in Arizona that's already asking customers, like they're fully booked for 2022, so they're no longer booking appointments for 2022. And because they are only allowing people to book for 2023, they've already started asking people to bring at least $3,000 a month for the last 6 months in bank statements. So that's how you normally prove that you've made this money, is through bank statements. And all these numbers are always net, so you have to consider that they are after taxes. These are numbers that you should have in either bank statements, pay stubs, investments, things like that, that should be net. So after any taxes have been paid.
And a quick question about the bank statements, because I do know that this has come up before. Some consulates require that they be certified or signed. Other consulates just require a copy. Can you kind of go into that a little bit? I mean, there's no consistency with this, but just to let
Yeah.
people know, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's different, every single consulate across the world, every Mexican consulate abroad has its own requirements. They all operate a little bit autonomously, right? Like they all have their own specific criteria. And some consulates require that you bring just copies of your financial statements, whether it's from investment, brokerage accounts, or from your banks, or other forms of records like Social Security benefits letters, things like that, right? To prove that you have a certain amount. And copies of them are perfectly fine. However, there are some consulates that do require you to not only bring copies of your statements, but they also want a signed letter from your bank or financial institution, basically verifying that you are the owner of the bank account and that this indeed is your balance every month. And they're just trying to make sure that this isn't, some sort of fraudulent document or something that somebody could have just easily made up on like Adobe or something like that.
And so what you're
Yeah,
advising is check with the consulate to make sure before you show up with copies. And
yeah.
will
For
they say
any
that
of
on the
these
website or?
Some do, some do not. Some are really good about updating their websites, and some are really bad about keeping their websites up to date, which is why we really recommend working with a facilitator. Facilitator will take your hand and do a lot of that research for you, sometimes reaching out to the consulate directly if that's what you require, and finding out what exactly the criteria they need before you show up for your consular appointment. That way you're not wasting your time and you come as prepared as possible, sometimes even over prepared. You might not even be asked for half of the things that they're requiring online, but it's always better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. We've had people be turned away because they didn't have signed letters with their bank statements and they didn't know beforehand. So it just depends on the consulate. Some people don't have a regular bank where they can just walk into a branch and ask for a signed document. So we always recommend, if it's a brokerage account, having the brokerage company issue a letter to you, right, stating that you are the owner of this bank account or this brokerage account. If they refuse to or it's impossible to, a lot of people have financial advisors and they have their financial advisors write them a letter, which usually the consulates will accept.
So facilitators a lot of facilitators, they deal with people coming from different consulates and that type of stuff. So they would know, okay, you're going to go to the Phoenix consulate or Arizona consulate and make sure you have them verified, or this consulate, don't worry about it. So facilitators are very good to have even from the beginning, even though they don't help you with the process. And
Some do. Some will schedule the appointment for you. It just
oh
depends on
wow.
the facilitator. Yeah, it truly depends on each facilitator. But they will take you from the very beginning, schedule the appointment for you, revise all your documents, prepare you for your appointment, meet you in Mexico, stand in line for you in Mexico, get your, all your documents ready in Mexico, and then you just go and pick up your card. So some facilitators really take care of the whole process. It just depends on the actual individual.
And that's awesome. And one thing that I will add to this is one thing that everybody need. I know that you mentioned 27 to 25 to 3,000. One thing, and you mentioned this, and I just want to kind of explain why, because everybody asks, why is it there's such a difference? Sometimes it's because of the exchange rate. Other times, from a diplomatic standpoint, each consulate has full discretion to issue your visa. So even if you do qualify, they can technically turn you down.
Yeah.
I have seen cases of that happening. It doesn't happen very often, but so they kind of set that requirement. Most of them use that formula you're talking about, but some consulates add an extra $200, or they'll figure the exchange rate difference. So that's why there's a variation. But the basic formula they tries to stick to. Now
as best as
that
possible. Yeah.
now that brings me into the next question. One thing that we noticed this year was that there was a backlog as far as getting a consulate appointment, and also a lot of backlogs at immigration. Can you go into that as far as what you're seeing now and if it's going to continue in the future?
Yeah, I am seeing that still. The consulates are supposed to use an online system known as Mexitel. And a lot of them do use this online system where you create an account, it asks you for your address, and then it populates basically the consulates nearest you and the ones that have appointments available. However, you're supposed to schedule, they have different, the types of appointments are different. You're supposed to schedule an appointment for a visa, and that might not be available. You may see the consulate nearest you available for appointments, but they might only have appointments for passports, or they might only have appointments for matrícula consular, which is basically just like a national ID, or INE, which is a registration card for you to vote, which is available to Mexican nationals and citizens. So you might not see the option for a visa appointment, is what I'm trying to get to. And it's kind of a 50-50 chance that consulates will let you walk in with that appointment, or will actually allow you to come in if you scheduled an appointment for a passport and you're not going in for a passport, you're going in for a visa. So,
Mm.
my recommendation is try your hardest to always book an appointment where it says actual visa, especially if you're going to be traveling more than an hour to get to your nearest consulate appointment. Another thing is that a lot of consulates just don't use Mexitel. Some of them have their own way of scheduling appointments. And usually that information, I will say, usually that information is available on their website. You go to services for non-Mexicans or services for foreigners, and then usually there's a section for visas, and they have pretty good instructions on how they want you to schedule an appointment. Because some of them have their own platforms. They want you to schedule an appointment on Calendly or some other external thing. And some of them want you to email them, and that's the only way that they handle appointments for residency visas. So I would say your best bet is to one, check Mexitel first, create an account, and check that platform first. If you can't find your consulate on there and you've checked various times of the day or various days of the week and you're not finding it on there, then go to the website and see what they have, what instructions they have. I would do that anyway, even after you've created an appointment, just to make sure. And if they do have instructions, follow those instructions. Either you're going to need to email them or use whatever platform they're asking you to use. If you're still having a really hard time finding an appointment, maybe because they just don't answer your emails, or they're not on Mexitel, they don't really have instructions for anything else, then you might need to travel to another consulate. And the thing is, not all consulates allow people from out of state to apply within their consulate. Some consulates are very strict about wanting you to live in the vicinity, like in the local area. Some are
Mhm.
not. So that's where I think a facilitator is really helpful, because they know which ones are, they do this all day, every day for hundreds of people, right? So, it's really helpful to know, to have somebody like that tell you, like, well, I recommend, if you can travel, I recommend maybe you go to, let's just say, San Antonio, for example, or Laredo or something like that, right? Um, so I think that's really good. Uh, the backlog of consulate appointments, I don't think it's going to get any better.
Mhm.
I don't see it improving. I just, if there's anything I know about Mexican bureaucracy, unfortunately, is that they sometimes implement new programs without really the resources to do it, and then a lot of people are just overworked, and so I don't see it getting any better. So I really do think that a facilitator is going to be just absolutely necessary in 2023 because of that. Because otherwise, you're going to have to spend a lot of time going through a lot of different consulate websites, and it's just like, what is your time worth to you, right?
Yeah, and the other thing about Mexican bureaucracy is sometimes it's not only the resources, but it's the direction.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's no direction coming from upstairs saying you need to do it so a certain way. So sometimes these consulates they just make up their own way. And one of the neat things that you mentioned about a facilitator is they get feedback from their customers. And so they are getting feedback on a daily basis, just like you are getting feedback on a daily basis on which consulates are working and which ones aren't. Now, this brings me to the next question, because I do realize that this year that McAllen was way off of the actual monthly income requirements. It was kind of like a little best kept secret. Their solvency requirements were very low, not compared to everybody else. And they were accepting appointments from all over. People were traveling from all over to go to McAllen. Um, is that still happening? And what are the financial solvency requirements there? Is that still an option?
Yeah. I think McAllen was a best kept secret until it wasn't anymore. And unfortunately, it did kind of blow up. I think we covered it a lot, and then also, other YouTubers covered it too. So it just became overwhelmed probably with appointments from all over the world. And their income requirements used to be 1725 a month US minimum for temporary residency. However, in 2023, their income requirements are now going up to 2,700 US dollars a month. So they're kind of like picking up the 2022 income requirements for 2023, which is kind of strange. Um, they are still allowing people from basically anywhere. However, for people who are still employed and not drawing Social Security or a pension or going through investments, they do require an employment letter. So basically, a letter from your employer stating that you will continue to work in Mexico even after moving to Mexico. So basically, that your employer is aware, right, that when you're moving to Mexico, and two, that you will continue having an income after moving to Mexico. Which we could cover, by the way, later on. I don't know when you want to touch on this, but there are some immigration offices in Mexico that will ask for bank statements when you go to renew. So we can cover
And
that.
and I'm actually going to cover that in this episode too. But this is an example. McAllen's an example of, like I said, I always make this comment. Every consulate, its own little kingdom. So this is an example of how they're very different. How they came up with 1,700. I have an idea of how they came up with $1,700, but even then, the idea that I have, it's still off a little bit, depending on exchange rates. And but this is an example of them coming up with their own number compared to everybody else and not following that formula that we're talking about. So the next question that I want to touch on is let's move on to Mexico. When you go into Mexico, the first thing I want to touch on is the regularization program. For those people that don't know, I'm going to ask if you can explain a little bit about what the regularization program is. Last year, at the end of the year, they say it was going to go away, and it's still going on. This year, they say it's going to go away, but I don't know. It may go on. But can you explain what the regularization program is? And based on the history, do you think it may extend on? And if it does extend on, make the audience aware of this option so
Yeah,
that if it does continue, this may be a good option for those that may not meet the financial requirements.
absolutely. If you don't meet the financial requirements for economic solvency, there is another way for you to currently get residency. And that's the special regularization program, which, like you said, was supposed to end in 2021, but they extended it in 2022. So I don't know what will happen in 2023, but there's no indication that they'll stop doing it. And the way to qualify for that is you have to have visited Mexico at least once between 2015, so 2015, and 2019, at least once. And you have to have had at least, the way that Mexico knows that you visited is you have to have had a FMM at one point. So either a stamp on your passport, Unfortunately, if you drove across the border and you didn't stop at INM, there's no way the Mexican government would know that you came in. So for those people that are living like on the Baja border or on the free trade zone that don't ever stop and register their entrance with INM, sorry folks, there's no way for Mexico to know that you came in between those years. But if you were one of the people who flew in, you automatically were able to get an FMM. So you need to have visited at least once between 2015 and 2019, and you need to be in Mexico currently with an expired FMM. So visited once, you came back somewhere between 2019 and 2022, and you now have an FMM, which is basically your tourist visa, or the form that they give you at immigration when you come into Mexico, and that needs to be expired. So you have if you're here or if you're in Mexico and you basically have 3 months left on your FMM, you have to wait for those 3 months to be up. But once it's expired, then you can go to INM, and if you meet the criteria, which is what I just mentioned, then you can basically get a 4-year temporary residency visa upfront without having to prove economic solvency, without having to go to a Mexican consulate, without having to leave Mexico. You do have to pay the INM fees upfront, which are about 14,000 pesos, so about 700 US dollars, depending on the exchange rate. But I mean, it's worth it. You have a 4-year temporary residency upfront that you don't have to renew. You don't have to live in Mexico to remain a resident. So it's a game changer for people who don't qualify under economic solvency. And a lot of like the word on the street is that they're gonna discontinue it in 2023. But I've also talked to a lot of facilitators that we recommend all over Mexico, and they say that there's no indication from the officers at INM that they're going to discontinue it in 2023. So I think people should really jump on that. If you qualify, don't wait. Like, you should get that quickly.
And that would also be another reason to hire a facilitator, because they keep track of all of that stuff. Because I do understand sometimes some INM offices require different types of paperwork for the.
Yeah.
It varies a little bit what they want to see.
The biggest thing that varies is, for example, in Los Cabos or in Baja, La Paz, Los Cabos, Rosarito, Ensenada, they don't require you to have 180 days. You can have 7 days on your FMM and still, as long as it's expired, and still qualify. Places like Merida or the Yucatan Peninsula, like Valladolid and Progreso, also don't require 180 days. So, if you're able to get less than 180 days, then you can make a trip to Mexico for essentially a week and become a resident right away.
That's awesome. And I don't see it going away, because I actually, even 2021, they said it was going to go away, but actually they said it was going to go even earlier than that. This was something that was kind of put together during COVID. And also, not only, it wasn't specifically put together because of COVID, but when immigration started upgrading their computer systems, there were a lot of people that were living here on an FMM continuing. We used to call them perpetual tourists that would run to the borders every 6 months, or some people would come here and they just let their FMM expire and live here. And this was kind of a way of helping these people out. Mexico wasn't trying to kick everybody out because you were overstaying your visa. They were trying to help. And this is something that's continued for the last, I want to say 3 years. It's been for a while. The requirements have changed a little bit and actually become more lenient. So that is a very good option. Now, when you get to Mexico, one of the things that we discussed, you said they may still want to see your financial documents. And also, when you renew, I know that there has been some concern that they tell you to bring your financial documents in, and people have been concerned that somehow they're going to be disqualified because I don't make enough. I made $2,700 or $3,000 when I first applied at the consulate, but I don't make it anymore, or I changed jobs. Can you clarify that a little bit and exactly how that's working?
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying that not all INM offices require financial documents for you to renew. The three offices that I know of that do are in Huatulco, in Oaxaca, and in Querétaro. There might be others, but those are the ones that I absolutely know require those financial documents when you go to renew. We're talking about temporary residency. So if you're a permanent resident, you don't have to worry. Your residency is indefinite. You'll never have to renew. If you get the special regularization program, you also don't have to worry because you don't have to renew. You're given a 4-year upfront. So these are people that came in through the traditional form of like a Mexican consulate, got the 1-year initial temporary residency, and then after 1 year, you can renew for 3 additional years. So at the renewal time, some INM offices are asking for people to bring in some form of financial document stating, you have some money available to you. And it's not, I mean, if you think about it, like it makes sense, right? Like the Mexican government wants to make sure that you're not going to be a financial burden to the system. And I will say that most INM offices do not require financial documents. I don't know if in 2023 that'll be something that changes across the board. We'll have to update everyone in 2023. But currently, there are a couple of offices that do. Now, there isn't a minimum amount that those offices are looking for. Like, it's not like they're asking for $2,500 or $2,000 or $3,000. There's not really an income amount that the INM or immigration authority offices in Mexico are asking for or looking for. In fact, I've never heard of anybody getting denied because of this or not being able to renew because of this. But just keep in mind that some offices do require you to bring some financial documents. And the reason I want to mention that is because, you don't want to spend all your money and have absolutely nothing available to you in the form of proof of some form of financial solvency when you're still up for renewal. I think that's important to keep in mind.
And I think it's more a bureaucracy thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of these offices get very bureaucratic, and this is the requirement, and you need to show financials. Doesn't matter what it says on the financials, but you need to show it because that's a rule. That's the way it works in Mexico sometimes. So there's no rhyme and reason sometimes. And actually, I'm going to go into the next thing where there's no rhyme and reason, but I'm going to preface it. There's this new electronic FMM process, but I'm going to preface it with one thing. 180 days is not guaranteed. I did that the last time. But let's talk about this new electronic FMM process. Mexico has been actually modernizing their immigration system with their computer systems and everything else. And they started a new process this year. And this process is to actually expedite people's entry into Mexico. And so you don't have to sit and wait in line. You don't get stuck behind someone that has to refill out their form because they didn't fill it out again or fill it out right. Can you explain this electronic FMM process and actually how it's expanding? Because I know it's expanded to several airports. It's still a pilot project, but it's not quite a pilot project because it's moving along pretty quickly from what I can understand. Can you explain this electronic FMM process? And then I'll go into the 180 days isn't guaranteed. But can you explain that process and what it looks like for 2023?
I think it's even important to define first what an FMM is. So the FMM is essentially your tourist visa, or if you're coming in as a resident to exchange your residency stamp for your residency card, which is known as canje, you also need that FMM. So it's a forma migratoria múltiple. It's a multiple use form that immigration in Mexico historically used for years and years and years. And everyone would get this little piece of paper, right, that basically said you have permission to be in Mexico. If you're from specific countries like Canada, the United States, the Schengen area, I want to say Japan, there's a few others that I haven't memorized, but if you're from a lot of different countries that don't require you to get a visa ahead of time for Mexico, you get your basically your visa is given to you upon arrival, which is this FMM. There are some countries that require you to get your FMM ahead of time, but I won't go too much into that because most of our viewers don't fall into those countries. So if you are from one of these countries, historically, you would come, show your passport, right? And then your immigration agent would ask you why you're in Mexico, if you're coming for business, pleasure, whatever. And they would have you fill out a form with the address you were going to be staying at in Mexico and some other information like the flight you're coming in on. Then they would take your passport, stamp, the Mexican stamp the FMM form, cut out the bottom piece, give that to you, and you could not lose that piece for the life of you because you wouldn't be able to leave Mexico without it. So that was really inefficient. I mean, there's a lot of people who lost that piece of paper, and it's just very inefficient because, like you said, it would take many minutes, right? When
And there was
hundreds of people came in.
And not only that, there was people that were being detained because they lost a piece of paper or couldn't produce it to an immigration officer. And some people were actually, the immigration officer will say, come back to the office with me. And coming back to the office could mean anywhere from an 8-hour wait. And there was people that even stayed their days waiting for immigration to actually verify that they came in legally or that they had an FMM somewhere in the system. And now that it's electronic, they can check on the computer.
Now it's far easier. Yeah, not perfect by any means, but it is a lot easier. And I'll get to why it's not perfect. But so nowadays, most international airports, there are a few that are still handing out paper FMMs, but most international airports are now doing everything digitally. Even if there are some people who fly in and the airline still gives out, the FMM form for them to fill out, but then they get to the counter and then nobody really needs it. So just don't worry, right? You don't need to fill it ahead of time. I know there is a website where you can get that filled out ahead of time and then you just show up and somebody's supposed to stamp it. There's really no need for that. Most of the time, they'll have you throw it out anyway. So just if you're one of the countries that doesn't require a visa ahead of time, just wait until you get to the actual airport. Once you get to immigration, they'll have you, right? They'll give you, they'll look at your passport. They'll ask, where you're staying, how long are you staying, all that information. They'll stamp you with if you're coming in as a tourist, the amount of time that you're allowed to stay. Usually that's 180 days. If you're coming in for canje, which is very important that you don't let them stamp you as a tourist and that you make sure that on your passport they write down CANJE. It's very important because if you get marked as a tourist, you basically have to start all over again. And it's up to you to make sure that they're doing it correctly. You cannot count on an immigration agent to do it correctly. And some of them are going by the motion so fast that they make mistakes. So they now stamp your passport. They'll have a QR code reader, which if you have a phone, you should take a picture of it. If not, we have that link on our website. I can get that to you, Ernie, if you want to include it in the description.
Perfect.
But usually you take a picture, that QR code populates a page, you fill out your information of where you're going to be staying, all your passport information, and then that populates your FMM, which is the EFMM. And if you're coming in for canje, you're going to need this digital document. You're going to need to print it out and bring a copy of it to your immigration appointment to actually move forward with your canje. Another piece of advice for couples who are coming in together to do their canje, make sure that you do not distract the immigration agent by either, chit-chatting or anything like that. Make sure that both of you come in separately because what we're seeing is a lot of mistakes from people coming in together to do canje. Only one of them gets registered and the other person is not in the system. And that's a headache to fix. Not impossible, but it will delay your residency card and your canje. So I would say come in separately. Each one of you get your own stamp. Each one of you get your own QR, and don't distract the immigration agent. I think that's the best advice I can give on that.
And the reason why I say 180 days is not guaranteed, what I'm seeing is more than likely 99% of the time, the feedback that I get, as a matter of fact, I have a couple of people that travel in and out of Mexico that always send me copies of their passport. Hey, I got 180 days. And what I'm getting feedback from them is actually the last person I got feedback from was they didn't even ask me any questions. They just said, what are you here for? Visit family. Okay, 180 days. I've got another piece of feedback of how many days do you need? 7 days. Oh, here's 180 days. So, but I've run into a couple of people that have sent me feedback where, as a matter of fact, one good friend of mine ended up kind of stuck in the line because someone in front of them was arguing with the immigration agents because they didn't get the 180 days. Everybody needs to, because the problem that I'm seeing is even YouTubers are saying, oh, 180, if you come into this airport, 180 days is guaranteed. And it's not. It's still up to the discretion of the immigration officer. And one thing for 2023, this is a new program. So it may change to where they start giving different amounts of days. I know from coming from a government background, sometimes when we implement these types of programs, or when we used to implement these types of programs, things like automatic 180 days were things that we went ahead and did because we were trying to perfect other parts of the program. So just keep that in mind, because one of the things that I always see is this 188 days is guaranteed because now they've got this new process. And part of the process is not guaranteeing 180 days. Part of the process is to expedite entry. Now, if Mexican immigration decides the way to expedite entry is to push one button that gives 180 days automatically, that's great for us. But
Yeah.
at this time, like I keep saying, and I warn, just be aware that it's not guaranteed, and still be prepared with for documentation such as return flights, such as your information on where you're going to be staying, that type of thing. And like I said, it could change. So, and the other thing that I wanted to go back to that I didn't touch on, actually I touched on, but we were talking about immigration offices being backlogged. One thing that I saw this year, or it started a little bit last year, is that a lot of immigration offices are able to print out your card the same day. Actually, when I
Mm-hmm.
went in to sign for my permanent residency, they already had that system in where you go in, you do your biometrics, and you sign, and you go wait, and 5 minutes later they come out with your card. Actually, that happened to me. Now, I'm hearing varying stories. Number one, about backlogs in immigration appointments, because some people, you have 30 days to come in to the country and complete your canje. But then when people come in, there's the next appointment is like 2 months out.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's because there's a backlog in the immigration offices. And I did touch on the backlog in the consulates and the backlog in the immigration offices. What are you seeing now? I do know certain offices are issuing cards the same day. Other offices are running out of plastic. I
Oh, yeah.
some
It happens
and
all the time.
and some offices actually just tell you come back in a week. Can you just go into a little bit about that, or what's going on right now? And do you see this situation being alleviated, or do you think it's going to continue?
I unfortunately do not see the situation getting any better. In March of 2022, before March of 2022, they had an online system that allowed you to book your appointment ahead of time. It worked perfectly. I have no idea why they took away that system, but in March of 2022, um, online appointments were no longer available for the second part of your residency process in Mexico. If you're a tourist, you will never have to go to INM. For the most part, right? Unless you're coming in for special regularization or family unification, or but for the most part, if you're just visiting Mexico, none of this concerns you. For the people that are doing canje, renewals, change of address, family unification, petitioning their, children or any of that through immigration in Mexico, well, you have to get in line because appointments online are no longer available. Some INM offices start their lines as early as the day before at 10 p.m. and you won't get seen until the following day at 10 a.m. That's insane. It's incredibly inefficient, but that's just how it is. Some offices start lining up at 4 in the morning, and then usually you get seen by like 9 a.m. that day, and you're given an appointment. Maybe you're given an appointment for that same day, maybe it's for the following day. And then there are some offices that you go in at a normal time, and they'll give you an appointment for 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, or maybe 4 weeks out. Some offices will only do certain processes on certain days of the week. So, like, for example, in Merida, they only do canjes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm not exactly sure if those are the days, but let's just say, right, that's the example. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays is when you do canje. And all these things change. Like, they change every month, sometimes every week. So whatever, I can't tell you what cities do what today, because a week from now, that'll probably be different. So again, it can be frustrating. I will say the biggest thing you will have to learn when moving to Mexico is patience, because you're going to need it when you're dealing with Mexican bureaucracy. And again, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having somebody who does this for a living take your hand and help you out through the process. Unless
And
you are just one of those people that has all the time in the world and you don't care going to immigration 3 or 4 times and getting in line and waiting 13 hours every time you do. I personally am not one of those people, so I think facilitators are the best money ever spent.
and I think some facilitators will actually go and stand in line for you, and just basically you meet up with them. They start in the line at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you meet up with them at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they already have your
Yeah.
time slot or whatever. So that's, just, it's worth having the person stand in line for you sometimes.
And the reason why it's important for some people to know that some offices can do the process the same day or within like a few days is because you cannot leave Mexico until you have your card in hand. Without, you can, but you need to get explicit permissions from immigration. If you leave without having your card, you've basically lost your residency, so you have to start over again. So that's why it's important for some people. Some people are getting their residency card and then they're going back home and packing or planning their move or going back to work, or maybe they're not moving to Mexico for a few more years. So that's why for some people that might be very important to know.
Well, I have a personal friend that actually traveled to Mexico City because his daughter was going to get her temporary residency, but his daughter could only take a couple of days off of work or a week off of work. And he called me in a frantic panic because in San Miguel, the appointments were several months off. How am I going to do
Yeah.
this? And then, and my daughter's coming in the next couple of weeks. So fortunately, he was able to go to Mexico City, stand in line at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he did it through a facilitator, but he found a location that would do it the same day. And his daughter walked out with her card. Actually, that same day, they were taking appointments. I think in Mexico City, I don't know how they're doing it now, but when he did it, they actually were taking the first, I don't know if you stood in line, the first 10 people, and they were doing their processes. Yeah. And so, that's something to take into consideration when coming here. And that's very important what you said about not being able to leave. And that's one of the things I told my friend is that even if you get an appointment 2 months out, because I know that what immigration was doing, even though you have 30 days to complete your canje, they were saying, well, as long as you get an appointment in the 30 days, but then if your appointment's 2 months out, you can't leave the country. And then you get stuck also in a pickle because when I did the residency, you had to wait a certain amount of time and all that stuff. And so while I was waiting for my card, I could ask for a special permission while I was going because I had a special number, my process number and everything else. And when you're waiting for an appointment, you're kind of stuck because you're not in the process yet. So even getting that special permission, and it's a real pain. You have to write, you get the special letter, then you get it stamped on your way out, then you get it stamped on your way in, then you have to take it back to INM. So it's not a very easy, and you can only leave for a certain amount of time. So
Yep.
that's something to take into consideration. And you brought up a great point there. Um, I guess we'll just wrap this up for 2022. I hope everybody has a happy holiday season. We'll have to see what's in store for 2023. Maybe we'll have a future episode on changes in immigration in 2023 if they do change. But I'd like to thank Mariana for coming on the show, as always. She's a great resource. And I've always said she's the boots on the ground. She deals with her customers every day, and she hears all these things, and she works with facilitators. So she's pretty up to date on everything that's going on. I'm going to leave, as always, a link to the Mexico Relocation Guide. I'm not an affiliate in the sense that she's my partner in crime in doing the show, but what she has done for us, I don't make any money off of recommending her. I don't do sponsorships, but what I did do with Mariana is I was able to convince her to give me a coupon code for 10% off, and for my viewers. So that coupon code will be in there. Her relocation guide is an invaluable resource. I can attest to it because I just finished helping Gringos R Us cross over in McAllen, and they are customers of Mexico Relocation Guide, and they had nothing but great things to say about you, Mariana, and how invaluable your resource and how lost they would have been if it wouldn't have been for you. So thank you very much for your time, Mariana. I know you're very busy, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. And thank you so much for your help, and look forward to episode number 8 coming next month. We're going to kind of try to keep this going every month. And I guess we'll see you soon. Thanks, Mariana.
Thank you so much. See you guys soon.